Hi there. I'm Emily Wright, and we're going to try something a little bit different here. This is going to be a series where I read and discuss maybe a little bit stuff that's already been published on my blog to introduce you to it if you don't know about it and if you think it would be interesting. And also, I just know that some people prefer to listen to something as opposed to reading it. Certainly, that's where my brain goes. I almost exclusively listen to audiobooks unless I'm doing research on something that I need to kind of be able to go back and physically look at and, interact with in a different way. But that's certainly not what I'm aiming to do here. This is supposed to be easy breezy, maybe some thought-provoking stuff. And then if you want to go back and search it out later, you can find it on my blog, emilywright.net. Been that way forever. So I wanted to start out with the post that I actually put up on January 1st of this year of 2026. And I called it Mini Post, Park Your Brain Somewhere New with TV Practice. Here goes. If you're trying to make physical changes in your playing, I highly recommend the following, with the caveat that different brains find different scenarios pleasurable. If playing with your attention split causes calamity, it's not a problem with you. This is not the right style for you, and that's fine. So just if this seems like something that would really damage your relationship with the instrument, not for you, no worries. I still love you. The overarching project of the last 20 years has been retrofitting the repertoire I learned using maladaptive technique and a lot of emotional baggage with these improvements that I've made and kind of continue to make. Some pieces are easier than others. Bach is particularly thorny. When I was at CSUN, that's Cal State Northridge, much of the work I did with Andrew Cook centered on composure, not being rattled or distracted. I had a horrible case of intrusive thoughts. Random math problems would sometimes just strike during really like weird passages. And this is not written in the blog, but I am actually very slow at math. I'm not bad at math, but it takes me time. And I find it so fascinating that I remember very vividly one performance when I was playing the first two movements of Elgar at a noon recital. And in my brain, literally as I was playing, I think I was on page 2 or 3 of the first movement, maybe, literally my mind was like, if you have 12 and a half rolls of quarters, how many pennies would that be? And even though that's like not a very difficult math problem, my brain just latched onto it. And I think I just like dissociated my way through the rest of that performance. Nobody said it was like terrible, but I remember like crunching on that, like trying to push it away and then having it come back over and over again. Just, I'm just saying, if your brain goes to weird places when you play, you're not the only one. And if your brain stays perfect, get out of here. We don't want your kind here, weirdo, whoever you are, that one guy. Also, in another, case of self-sabotage, every time I go to record a podcast, whether I'm the guest or the host, I drink something fizzy. Because why not? Why not just like have the chance of burping? Okay, anyway, let's come back. So yes, I was having these intrusive thoughts. And so I was basically unable to otherwise park my brain in a productive place when the pressure was on. I just found that my attention would divide as soon as I was under any kind of pressure, usually being observed by somebody whose musical opinion I care about. So he had me practice first, like holding a conversation with him when I was playing the first movement of Haydn D, like a real conversation. Like, okay, Emily, so what is your plan for the rest of the week? What class are you struggling in? What is the topic for your paper? Just like, and kind of trying to autopilot my way through Haydn D major. And we were particularly working on that because it is still what I consider my war horse. Like that's kind of the piece that I audition with most of the time. It's just, it's an important piece for me. So Andrew kind of recognized that I really needed to kind of clean house with Haydn D major. And then at home, I would practice watching ESPN. And again, I would favor the television and kind of lean on rote knowledge for the musical component. It made me a much more robust player, and the added bonus of not being able to focus on the minutia of the occasional like artifact in my sound or slightly pitchy extension was really, really freeing. Now, this practice is about what I call just the facts of the piece. And the facts of the piece are what are the notes? What are your fingerings? What are the rhythms? Can you manufacture all of those? That's the facts. So it's not anything like what is the quality of your playing? What is your beautiful interpretation? Any of those things. It's just literally like the bare minimum physical stuff that's required to vomit out some version of the piece with success, because that is what we're kind of trying to train as we get into performing or auditioning on something. It just needs to be fully automated. So the question is, do I really know this piece? Even when the cognitive lift is heavier, right? It's the same reason, by the way, like when we're going to, maybe going to drive someplace unfamiliar, or maybe it's a tricky parking job that you have to like reverse into a really tight space, and we turn the radio down most of the time, right? That's because we really need one or two, maybe I'm looking at this and feeling my hands on the steering wheel. Just understand that the cognitive load is deceptive, and we've convinced ourselves that we are like, it's fine, I'm used to dividing my attention, I can talk to somebody and be on the phone. No, we can't. My attention is so much worse when I'm looking at my phone and somebody's trying to talk to me, and it's also disrespectful. But that's actually one of the reasons why, for instance, when I used to travel to people's homes, I would insist that our lessons were in a place that nobody could walk through. Even the idea, the possibility that somebody could be walking through changes. I mean, it changes a lot of things, but it changes your nervous system. You're always like preparing to be observed. And then it just upsets the dynamic of the lesson. So just understand that if you can have a little sacred space for your practice, or have it just so you can at least go uninterrupted. Actually, some of the best practicing I did was in a very noisy place, right? Either at Northridge or at Idlewild, any of the other places I went. I was surrounded by like the cacophony of other people practicing, but there was something really bolstering about that because we were all there to do the same thing. And it was very rare that, if you have a sign up on your door, it's like, please don't bother me. People understood and they wouldn't bother you. So a sacred space that you know that you can be very vulnerable and uninterrupted. That's going to be the ideal for creating, for creating like focused concentration. This is the other side of that coin is there some way to train for being in some situation where your attention is necessarily split, playing in front of other people? There's part of the mind that just goes to the spot where you realize I am being listened to, I'm being heard and observed. So just understand that you're not imagining it. It is harder to do this stuff when you're being observed. It just is. So, so when I was doing this TV practice, it was primarily ESPN. I wanted to have on. I just used to love that network. So when I would find a passage that like wouldn't tolerate TV practice, I would know that I needed much more woodshedding. Basically, I like practice techniques that are not just remedial. I like it if they're diagnostic as well. So sometimes when you're doing TV practice or something like this, you just realize this is so far away from being automated. I need to not just like stare at the page. I need to stare at this page in like a quiet room. I need to write in my fingerings. I need to practice this. Next time I sit down in front of the TV, I need 100 repetitions of this under my fingers, because that's when you have some semblance of hope that you might actually have it automated. And I riff on this in a different post, but just understand that while practice is not just repeating things. And if you're somebody who's paid attention to my teaching, you know that this is what I think. And this is not just what I think. This is the actual orthodoxy of people who are thoughtful about teaching, especially musical instruments. But this should apply across the board. But when you are learning the notes, if there is any chance at all that you could put a foot wrong for any reason, it doesn't matter what reason it is. It doesn't matter if like you can hear the note or like your finger slipped or you accidentally shifted to the wrong position or finger or whatever. It just means it's not baked yet. It is not fully in there. It's fine. Don't go interrogating the reasons unless it becomes like something pathological that you might want to like bring to your instructor. But only when you actually have something under your fingers, then you repeat it. Then you practice it. But all of that work that is in preparation that happens before that moment, that is learning it. Once you have learned it, then you practice it. The practice is not the learning. Learning and practice. Now, people might think I'm splitting hairs here, but I guess I'm just trying, I want success for you guys. And what I keep noticing is how unserious people are when it comes to nailing something. The image I always ask people to imagine is we've all seen movies about like people whose Olympic dreams come true. And I want you to think about your arc with a particular skill you're building or a piece that you're working on, like ice skaters. In the movies, it's always like, somebody's really good at this, and then they go through juniors, and maybe they're up and they're down, but then they found a coach that's really good, and then they, qualify for something, and they fall flat on their face. And then there is like the core of the movie. The core of the movie is like a montage of hard work, and then maybe the ice skater learns the skill and you see them nail the triple axel. If the ice skater was going to act like a lot of serious people who think that they're serious adult learners, they would do that axel and they would run their full program a couple times, and then they would do the Olympics. Whereas actual people who do very well in situations like the Olympics, they practice that jump, that skill, until it would take an act of God for them to entertain the idea of missing it. And sometimes that does happen, right? But more often than not, maybe some weird version of it happens under tremendous nervous pressure, right? But the architecture of it is still there, right? So maybe they'll 2 foot the landing or something. And then the musical equivalent of this is, maybe I will like goose a shift. I'll overshift. I'll miss something, or there'll be like a little scratch in my sound. But because the facts of the piece have been well established, and I've learned how to practice with my attention slightly split, I'm insulated thus far since I've been practicing this way from the vagaries of what happens when you kind of stop before something is truly consolidated in your hand and you just kind of think, well, I did it. And, most of the time I hit it. Most of the time is not going to get the job done. And the first time you like realize that it's not going to get the job done is when you are sitting in front of everybody and there's just like this weight that descends on your shoulders and you realize, oh, I could have done so much more. That's when we get honest. It's kind of interesting. Anyway, so, you know, it's a solid practice tool and it's a diagnostic tool, because if you can't survive a particular passage with the TV on or with a distraction like that on, you need to go back and kind of make sure you've got the nuts and bolts in order. So what I discovered also is that the sound kind of was swallowed up by whatever was going on the TV. So I wasn't like obsessed with like all these little sounds, and like the critique of myself just kind of got really quiet. And so I was really able to commit to the physical changes also that we were trying to enact with a lot less resistance. Because when you make a physical change, I used to be like a big pronator. I used to like roll my hand back pretty far. It got started with extensions and then just progressed and got much worse from there. And I resisted the change, not because I didn't think it was a good idea. I've had some of the greatest cello pedagogical minds look at my hand and go, babe, you've got to fix that. And I tried half-heartedly, but the thing is, my intonation was actually very good when I had terrible technique. And then when I went to the correction, the technique that was going to give my hand and my arms some relief from all the pain that, that torsion puts on your wrist, my intonation was so bad. And then also my intonation was bad, but since I was doing something unfamiliar with my left hand, my right hand would kind of jump in and freak out too. So if I practice with the TV on, and I also have a giant, this rubber coated metal mute. I think this is an Artino, but there's a bunch of different brands. I mean, That is very, very heavy. It dampens the sound a lot. And when I'm not like micromanaging my sound, I can make these physical changes, and I'm still doing them to this day. Up at the top of this, I told you my main project is going through all the repertoire that I learned before I figured out how to have more chilled out, solid practice. All of those things are like monuments to my fear and my tension and just my general anxiety about being a person. And so it is such a pleasure to go through and find these pieces and say, today, Brahms F major, I'm going to diffuse the bombs that I have installed at certain parts that would just serve to absolutely freak me out every time I got to them. And so the repertoire becomes a much friendlier place, a place full of possibilities. So this year, 2026, among other things, I'm trying to go through the movements of suites 4, 5, and 6 that I just thought were not for somebody as injury prone as I've been. And I'm just taking all the time I need to consider them possible, consider them available to me, and to take all the time I need at the introductory phase and at the TV watching phase to just see if I can like get these notes, get the facts of the piece out into the world, and then I will start crafting better sound, interpretation, all that good stuff. So the resistance when we are doing like physical changes, it really does, it comes from sounding bad because we're doing something new rather than this is what's right for your body. So just kind of keep that in your mind. And I wrote here, this practice is what got me through the prelude of the fourth suite the other day, which it literally would have been impossible when I was 22. My technique, but also just I was not patient. And my practice was still semi-performative. Like I would kind of imagine that someone was listening. It was like a miniature performance. And that's a very dangerous way to practice, not only because it doesn't build any meaningful knowledge, but also if it goes well, you put your instrument away and you're like, that's how this piece is. No, it's not. That's how that one time went. And you're basically introducing luck into your practice. If after you kind of have a good run, if you're like, well, that's it. I'm not saying don't feel good about a good run. Some people never, ever get one, ever. Most people who try the cello quit, right? It is that hard. But once you have some facility on the instrument, it can be very easy to think, and now I've reached this level and I should have smooth sailing. As it turns out, our goalposts still move, and as we get better at the instrument, the repertoire, of course, gets much, much more difficult as well. So I feel not threatened by any piece in the repertoire, but I acknowledge the difficulty that's available there that I'm going to have to contend with if I want to play a piece. Looking at you, Kodai, I played that a very long time ago, not very well. So that's one of the ones. Maybe 2027 is Kodai because suites 4, 5, and 6. That's a lot. That's enough anyway. And I still haven't finished the Sinfonia Concertante by Prokofiev. So lots of stuff to still learn. So then what I do in the next section of this post is I give ingredients for TV practice, just if you want to give this a shot. So what you need is a piece or an excerpt. So write like a chunk, a half a page, or even just like a passage, something that hangs together as a phrase that you are working on that is at least kind of memorized, because you really cannot be looking at the notes and hearing the TV and monitoring. You're going to probably choose to close off the parts of your mind that we actually very much want to open and allow to challenge the cognitive, like your cognitive load sharing, kind of like how you multitask in your mind. So you can look at the page between repetitions if you need to, but you really do need to not be staring at the music for this to work effectively. Then you've got the TV with something legitimately interesting on. So for me, it used to be ESPN. Now I watch Mayday air disasters because I'm an aviation junkie, and for whatever reason, I guess it's the teacher in me, watching investigations of when otherwise very competent people make terrible mistakes. As somebody who loves aviation, as somebody who has gotten halfway to a private pilot's license a couple times, that's still on my bucket list. it makes me feel like I can learn something to make myself a safer pilot. So that's kind of, so it needs to be something though interesting, something that you're following that you like. And then preferably with subtitles on, because that's going to challenge you a little bit more. Like you actually have something to read that you're not playing. It's just, we really want to get in there and just start seeing if we can't screw you up. In the end, the answer is no, you can't screw me up. But we just want this kind of multi-pronged challenge here. And then you are going to need this giant honking covered metal practice mute. And the TV volume should be kind of equal to your cello sound. We really don't want you to be able to hear a lot of detail in your sound, but you do want to hear if you're like, oh gosh, I am a whole step out of position. Okay, that's we need a little bit more information. All right. So then with the ideal feeling that you and your teacher are working on, securely set as your intention, lightly practice your passage. What does that mean? The ideal feeling? What is that? Now, some teachers don't talk about it in terms of physical sensations so much, but there are accompanying physical sensations to any technical thing that we're trying to accomplish. So with my students, we're constantly working on, gravity. Oh, I hope that wasn't loud. Gravity, like, is what provides the weight and the strength in your hands, that your fingertips should feel light, that you should, lightly release fingers that you are not actively using, not lift them up like crazy, but just, anyway, these just kind of very, very typical goals that are just kind of like throughout my teaching. Most of my students are always working on these things. So I bet you have a couple things that you have been working on for a while. This is the an ideal environment for you to try these things on. So so just kind of mindlessly repeat this passage with the change that you're trying to implement. Just kind of remain very, very supple and in total compliance though with the physical feeling you're trying to nurture. So actually one of my favorite examples of a physical sensation to chase after comes from Amit Peled from his book The First Hour, which I highly recommend. And what I also love about it, not only is it stellar, but it also you buy it from him and all the money goes to him and the other person who wrote it. It's just, it's tidy, it's affordable, it's well thought out, and there's a reason that his students are just absolutely incredible. He talks about the strawberry on the fingerboard, and what that is he wants you to imagine that there's an extremely ripe strawberry, and you're holding it in your left hand between your thumb and whatever finger that you are working on the fingerboard. And he says, if it's a very ripe strawberry, you could very easily put your finger all the way through to your thumb, right? We could smash that fruit. And so many cellists, especially, and bassists, right, really clamp onto the fingerboard that way. So he says, I want you to hold the strawberry and hold it just lightly enough so that it will stay in your fingers, but you don't want it hard, and you certainly don't want to put your finger all the way through it. Another friend of mine, Roz Tordo, actually, wonderful violist. She works at the lab school at the University of Chicago. She told us about the theory of the basement. It's the exact same idea as the strawberry, but basically imagine that your thumb is the basement and that whatever finger you are using is an elevator. And so you know that the elevator goes down to the basement, but the basement never like rises up to meet the elevator, right? So we want touch on the neck, but we don't want the thumb to offer counter pressure. It doesn't do anything except make your hand kind of turn into a gnarled root ball, right? It's just not great. So, I know I've got like two people who are already going to be like, well, that's why I hold my thumb off of the neck. No, no, no. You can hold your neck. You can hold your thumb off of the neck with every bit as much tension as you're jamming it on with. What you need to do is cultivate a soft, supple, malleable thumb that goes where your fingers need it to be. And that's sometimes lots of different places. So just kind of keeping that in mind. But that's a wonderful goal, by the way, if you don't have one with your teachers. And even if you're a violinist, you can still think about that, right? With the basement analogy still works. We just don't want any squeezing with the thumb. Either way you put your thumb, because I know there's multiple options on violin and viola. So you're just going to keep repeating and repeating and repeating until this passage feels substantially physically changed, where it feels more natural with the new open hand maybe that we're cultivating or whatever else is like the physical goal that you kind of are working on. So you're just kind of, you want to lull yourself with this diffuse attention, right? You're just sort of like just feeling the big motions in your hands. Everything else is just kind of washing over you. You're sort of looking at the TV and just repeating it and repeating, creating like a sense of automaticity. So you don't want it to assault your ears. You don't want a big sound and you don't want to be nitpicking the details of what you sound like. It's just this physical experience, right? You're just feeling nice in your body while you're playing. So then the next time you do your typical non-distraction, non-muted practice, try to bring that softness. I call it a blasé softness of body and mind into that space too. And I will close with this idea of there is a mind-body connection. That is not even in dispute or connected or like um it's not controversial, right? But they tell us to, relax your mind and then the body will follow. Um, as somebody whose mind tends to be just like screaming with anxiety and worry about things, except actually when I play cello, it's like a place that I've really carved out where that doesn't live anymore. Your body can also feed back to your mind. So for me, I wasn't able to achieve some kind of place of serenity, and then my body responded in kind. What I ended up doing was noticing that after 20 minutes of doing practice that was exclusively pertaining to having soft thumbs on both sides, I realized that when I would stop playing and I would kind of look on the stand and kind of consider what I was going to do next, that there was no attaching anything miserable, upsetting, self like self negating, self-deprecating, none of it. It was just the facts of your practice, which is, should I do that again? Would I feel better if I did that again? Should I break it up into some other way? Maybe I should just leave it overnight and come back to it in the morning. All of those things are just neutral statements of what we could do next. And it's not like, well, if I don't want to fuck this up, I got to do it a bunch more. How well do we know that one? Or no, your teacher would not like it if it came out that way. Or I'm not the kind of person who'll ever do this right, so maybe I should just, try something else. Or the worst one, I just want to sound good, I want to have fun. And then using all of the techniques that you've been trying to break during your diligent practice, you just go ahead and reinstall that malware right back in your hands and you do a terrible run of something that might even sound better, but is damaging you as a player and maybe even as a person with a body that has limitations. May you never actually come up against them as much as I have, but now that I've been working with almost exclusively adults, almost exclusively for 10 years, most people who do not take the way they physically interact with their instrument seriously, and if they're not open for some adjustments, lots of injuries and things that they'll be like, oh, it wasn't cello, I just opened my car door a weird way, or I slept on it funny. And it could very well be, but I'll tell you that doing this for years, the thing that actually got me, there was absolutely a couple times where like the cello like would after I was playing, I'd be like, "Ooh, that really hurts." But actually, for me, it was learning a two-handed backhand in tennis, and that is actually what made it so that I had to take like months off in high school. I think it was like my sophomore or junior year. So just keep in mind that what you do on the instrument does count. It counts in your body. It counts towards the reps. So, my parents used to be, if I would slam a door, they'd say, "There's only so many slams in that door before you actually do something to it. You break the door or you loosen the jam or something else." That is the truth. All physical structures have limits, and I don't want you to find yours. I want you to find your happiness on the instrument. And I want you to have productive practice that leads to successful performances. So give this TV practice a shot. Let me know what you think. Thanks for listening.